are some really great products. Even things like instant brown rice can be really convenient, but like I say, it depends on your overall health goals and how often and how tolerant you are of those products. So many of the grains that we eat are a great addition to the diet. They provide us B vitamins, iron, protein, a lot of fiber. So anybody that has issues with constipation can really benefit from eating more grains because it really helps add fiber to the diet and helps improve transit time, how quickly we eliminate. Another starchy food category that is like grains are beans and peas. So chickpeas, black beans, white beans, kidney beans. They are a source of carbohydrate, so instead of having pasta for dinner, you could also have a small side of a bean salad or bean soup as a portion of your meal, or even a larger portion. Now, the interesting thing about beans is they also contain protein. They are a plant-based protein. So we get a twofer. We get some carbohydrate and protein in the bean components of our meal. And they're high in fiber, so these can also be really nutritious in terms of providing the fiber, the iron, often potassium, and trace minerals as well. So beans are another added component of our diet. And you know, if we're looking at doing baking, and many people will often ask me about, well, you know, what kinds of flours do I use if I want to make, you know, my own homemade muffins or breads or cookies or crackers? And that's where we get into looking at different types of flour. And I have courses in addition to this one that focus on how to use these. So you may be interested in other classes that I offer, like a sourdough bread class. You can learn how to make your own homemade yeast breads. But on my own, I make muffins and cookies, cakes, sourdough breads, Irish soda bread, tortillas, all kinds of things. So these types of flours can be very versatile. The millet flour, oat flour, there's even paleo flours like banana flour and cassava flour. Cassava is actually a vegetable, which leads us to these. This is a yucca, or also known as a cassava. It's a tuber, so you can find many of these products in so many different forms. And that's what's really interesting about these different flours. This cassava flour, I prefer to use it in smaller quantities in baked goods like breads or muffins, but as a standalone flour, it works really great for tortillas, and it gives that nice chewy texture that we're accustomed to with wheat-based tortillas. Now with that, when we're looking at commercial breads that we don't bake at home, but we buy them ourselves, breads like, this is one by Little Northern Bakehouse or Canyon Bakehouse. You'll see a variety of different types. One of my favorite online companies also makes sourdough breads, and there's a link for that at the bottom of your page for all of these different products. But when we're looking at these different labels, if you're wanting to buy a commercial bread, the first place you want to look is on the back of the label, and that will tell you all you need to know. If you're looking at a label and you look at fiber, you look at protein. Those are two of the most important nutrients to look at for a bread. Now, a whole grain bread, a very nutritious whole grain bread, will have about 3 grams of protein and 3 or 4 grams of fiber, if you're lucky. That to me would indicate more whole grain flour. So you wouldn't even need to look at the ingredients sometimes. You can certainly look for other things like additives or chemical dough conditioners, artificial flavors, or any other excessive amounts of sweeteners. So sometimes when you look, you're going to see a lot of starches. So something like tapioca starch, potato starch, arrowroot starch. These are all acceptable gluten-free flours. However, there's no nutritional value in them. And it'll basically, on all the nutritional parameters, it'll say 0, 0, 0, 0. Where when you look at, say, the sorghum flour, you know, this has 3 grams of protein and 2 grams of fiber per serving. So your whole grain flours are definitely going to have more nutritional advantage. So when you're reading labels at the store, you know, pull out the products, look at the label on the back, you know, scan, look for protein, look for fiber. The higher the number, the higher the quality of the product. If it says 1 or 0 on any of those nutritional parameters, then generally that's a pretty low nutrient dense food. The highest nutrient containing foods are going to be our fresh produce. So as I mentioned, this is a cassava. We're going to see a little demonstration with these tubers called taro, which are popular in the South Pacific and the Caribbean. We also have different kinds of sweet potatoes. You may look around at different times of the year. They often have seasonality. So we're often familiar with the traditional orange sweet potato, or yams, as they're sometimes called. But there's also a new variety that we're seeing more often, which is a Japanese sweet potato. It's a white-fleshed sweet potato. It's still very sweet. And the flavor is a little bit different than the traditional sweet potato. So sometimes it's fun to mix them together if you do a casserole, or simply, you know, roasting them in the oven, or soups. And eating the skin is always desirable. The fiber is in the skin, and many of the potassium and the nutrients are in the skin, like iron. So eating the skin is always desirable as often as possible. And of course we have regular potatoes. There's red skin and russet, and blue potatoes or purple potatoes, if you've ever seen those. Those are also really great gluten-free meal options to include. We also want to think about the squash family, so acorn squash, or also butternut squash. You'll see these a lot more in the fall, and I usually just bake them and add a little bit of some salt, pepper, cinnamon maybe, or olive oil. The larger butternut squashes are great for soups or side dishes. You might say, well, what's this? Oftentimes when I'm at the store, the cashiers won't often know what this is, and they'll say, what is that? This is called celery root, or celerac. You'll see different names. And it is, in fact, the root of the celery plant. So the celery grows up like this, and sometimes in the stores the celery is still attached. So know that that's good too. You can use that, and if the celery stalks are sticking out, you can use those for as herbs. Like usually it's very leafy, and you can chop that up, and that gives a lot of flavor to soups or stocks or cooked grains. This root itself, though, what I do is cut off the skin with a sharp knife, and inside is a white flesh that can be steamed or used in soups. I use it as a substitute for cream in cream soup. So if you make cream of broccoli soup, you add, I would use, maybe for a pot of soup, I might use half of one this large, unless I was making a big pot of soup. And then puree that, and it lends a nice creamy texture without actually adding cream. The advantage of the celery root is it's very low in carbohydrate. So it's a low starch option for those of you who are mindful of that, or may have some high blood sugar and want to keep that under control. It makes great sauces. You can shred it and use it like hash browns. Lots of different uses for these different roots and tubers. And actually, if you wanted to do a really fun hash brown type of dish, I might mix several root vegetables together. You know, a carrot, maybe a chunk of the celery root and some sweet potato, mix them together and pan fry those or roast them in the oven. Also nice ideas. And then, you know, last but not least here, we have corn on the cob, fresh corn, frozen corn. Also a nice starchy side dish. Can be used corn chowder, corn soups, black bean and corn salads. So you would actually mix some of these components together to create side dishes. And let's also keep in mind using fresh fruits. Bananas, apples, mangoes, pineapple, they all have a significant amount of carbohydrate and a large, diverse array of nutrients, vitamin C, vitamin A, potassium. So these are really great additions to a gluten-free diet. So I hope I've given you a nice overview of some different ways that we can embellish our meals without needing pasta and traditional crackers and cookies and breads. There's lots of products to begin to explore and experiment with in our journey for gluten-free meals.